Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system, particularly working on this compensation dashboard. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, founder and principal consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And before we move on to creating this open market data piece here, this is where we're going to compare our market study information to our actual current state within our organization. We received an email in the form of a question on how we can turn a two-dimensional array, such as an array of how we get information from a sheet using getValues, into an object, and particularly how it was that we got this. How is it that we can do this without having to list it out or go with it? How do we take a 2D array into an object, either an array with an object or just straight object key value pairs? And I'm going to take it one step further, because ultimately the way this is coming to us is actually in what's called JSON, JavaScript object notation. So we're going to do all three of them, and we're going to take kind of like a little detour before we jump into that compensation market analysis section and go over how to do just that. So let's actually create ourselves a two-dimensional array, and I have a two-dimensional array here. And an array is handy if we're looking at a spreadsheet that's never going to change, that data is never going to change, and we can filter down by the index. And we know the index, and we just simply need to go grab a value out of a column. And that works when we have a small amount of data, so to speak. And that data typically doesn't change to where we know that whatever value is at index 1 will always be index 1. Now, if you come over here and look at, say, our spreadsheet. Now, this is a spreadsheet of just, it's salary market data, but I didn't go through and check to see if their facilities manager actually aligns with our facilities manager and so forth. We're just going to say that it does for the sake of instructions. But if you were doing this in real life, of course, you would ensure that your web developers match the job descriptions and the scope and responsibilities that you're comparing apple to apples with what the web developers in your salary survey states. But this is just a this is just a salary survey that I pulled for Wisconsin, broken down into counties and whatnot, of not all, but a majority of our job titles. As you can see, even though this isn't all of them, we still have 3,299 rows and quite a bit of columns. Looks like maybe 28 columns. So this is an awful lot of data. And as we're sending this data over to our dashboard, this is going to change. I mean, the indexes are going to change because we're going to be carving out this data and making new arrays out of it. And that's the reason why when we started pulling our data for our filters, we started using this notation instead of straight arrays. Now, objects work by drilling into the data based on key and value pairs. So what I mean by that is, okay, let's look at this two-dimensional array. We have this two-dimensional array. This is how it looks. And in order to access this, we would simply, let's just create a function. Let's just call this function test, because it's going to go away. So actually, no, let's not call it test. Let's call it something that we're actually going to use. Let's call it get market data. There we go. Okay, get out of there. There we go. Okay, so in order to access this, if we wanted to access, say, Bob's name, we would simply go in here and log out people array at the whatever index we're trying to get to. Now, we're not searching for the string Bob, we're searching for the index that has that value in it. So it's going to be 0, 1. Now remember, this is a two-dimensional array. So if we were to simply just say save this and then come down here and run this, it would return that inner array at that index number 1. Now to get Bob, we would have to drill in even further and go 0 and then run it, and then it would return that value, which works if this doesn't change. If this array doesn't change to a degree to where this is always 1, 0. So unfortunately, that doesn't happen. And the more you manipulate data, the more you actually start changing these indexes. And it can get incredibly complicated because you're trying to figure out what index am I or what array am I working with and what index is it now. And then you're just filling it full of ones and zeros. And if you're trying to read that code, you're like, I have no idea what this is. I have to go do some research before I even know what's going on here. So now let's look at an array of objects, which is kind of what this looks like. And let's create another variable here. And let's say people array of objects. And what this is going to be equal to, and how this looks is, let me grab it. I already have it typed up so we don't have to watch me type. It's going to look like this. So we have an array, but inside each one of those arrays is an object. So now let's try and log that out. Do people array of objects. And obviously when we run this, it's going to produce, that. So this is similar, except in order to get to say Bob's city, if we were to get to Bob's city here, we would go 1, 0, 1, 2. That would produce Bob's city. But to get Bob's city here, it's going to be a little bit different. So even though this is an array, we need to go to, this is an element, this is an element. So this is going to be the 0, 1 index. Now we wouldn't be able to drill in and go down 2 again because this is, this is not an array, it's an object. But what we could do is type in city, which is the key for the value that we're looking at. So now let's run this. And you'll get San Francisco. If we were looking at, say, Alice, if we were trying to find Alice, we would do 0 and say we're trying to find Alice's age. And then we would run it, and it would produce Alice's age. So that's an array of objects. So let's create another one. Let's call it people object, people key value object. Now what this is this isn't an array. This is just a straight object of key value pairs. So let's go over to my sheet here and pull this up. So what this looks like is this. So you'll notice that there is not an array here. It's an object of key and value pairs. And if you remember how we did our options, that is exactly what it was. We had our trend line, and then we needed to drill in to that 0 trend line, and then that other trend line had other key value pairs. So that is what this is. So now to access data from this, it's a little bit more simpler. And if you think about how we get data from databases in HR or just in general in HR, we think about, okay, a division has what employee, Alice, and we need to find Alice's age. Well, we would say, well, what is Alice's age? Alice, age 25, city, New York, position, such and such. So we can actually access it a little bit more intuitive by simply grabbing the variable name and then drilling into it. Alice, and let's say city. Now let's log this out and we should get New York. New York. Now, if we just wanted all of Alice's information, we wouldn't drill down as far. Age, city. And if you've watched our previous videos, we ran into an issue of things being kind of out of order. So we had to order it in order, I believe it was our records management. We had to essentially take the object and force it into an order. And that's what we were doing up here. We were forcing experience to be first, salary to be second, gender, and all this within that array so we can go through and grab it, 0, 1, 2, and all that. So when you're talking about objects and whatnot, objects, they don't care about order. Arrays care about order, objects don't. Objects just care about the key. You access it by whatever the key is, and you name it whatever makes sense to you. So when you're thinking of databases, or particularly pulling data from the internet or APIs, you're going to get your data typically in the form of objects. If you're working with JavaScript, it's going to be JSON. And what JSON looks like is, well, let me show you. So JSON, something a little bit different. So let's create a way to take this array and put it into a JavaScript object notation. So we'll create another function here, and let's call this function convert array to JSON. Now these are going to be helper functions. I'm going to create convert array to JSON and then so on. Actually, let's pause on this one. Let's write a function to take this and turn it into this first. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab an array into an object. So let's change this. We'll get into a JSON here in a second. Array to object. Now what we're going to want to do is take this people array and essentially map it and forcibly give it its keys. So let's take our people array, and we want to map this, and for every row we want to do something with it, like so. Now what we want to do is we want to assign the name. We want to give it a key, and that name is going to exist for every row at row 0. It's going to be row 0. And then so on. Age is going to be row 1. And city is going to be row whatever here, 2. And then what we can do is put this in a variable. Let's call this let test, because we're not going to actually use this variable. We're just simply going to return that. And then let's log this out and see what we get. array to object. So now we're taking this two-dimensional array and we are putting it into that array of objects. So it looks like this right here. So now to make this simply a helper function, we don't want to do that. We just want to simply return that, and it's going to accept an array. So now every time that we want to call this function, we just simply call it and then pass whatever array it is, just like we were doing up here with this categorize age. Okay, so there's that function. Now let's create the other helper function, and we'll call this one array to key value object. I guess doesn't get much more descriptive than that. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to take this two-dimensional array and turn it into this. Now, we're not able to do the same thing because if you caught on, this is exactly what we did up here. Almost verbatim. Actually, it is verbatim. But we can't actually do that with our key value objects because we're going to have to construct this. So let's create a variable. And let's create this variable and call it object. We need to make it an empty object because we're going to fill it. Now what we need to do is take an array, and we'll use this people array. And instead of running a map, what we're going to need to do is run a section of code every single row. And to do that, we're going to use a for each loop. So we need to run a for each on this. And this for each is going to take each row and do something to it. And what it's going to do is it's going to construct this right here. So we first need to assign this object. So the object is at row 0 of this two-dimensional array. And then we need to create this inner piece right here. And now that inner piece is going to be essentially the age and the city. So that's going to be an array, or excuse me, that's going to be a object. Let's make this one line. There we go. So we're going to need the age, and the age is going to be row 1. And then we're going to need the city, and the city is going to be row 2. Now what we can do is log out the object here after we get done building it and running this for each, and then you'll see what happens to that people array. So let's save it, and then we'll run this code now. And you'll see that it is a key value pair object. And then we access it the same exact way here. So now let's think about putting it into a JSON format. And I'm going to take this a little bit further simply because JSON, when you get information from the internet or from another database, you're going to get it in a way that may be unfamiliar to you if you don't know JSON. You can put it in JSON and it works very well with JavaScript, obviously, because it's JavaScript object notation. So to put an array into JSON, let's convert array to JSON. And I'm doing this way because if you think of our piece here, we have a header. So what we can do is take the header and make that its own key. Because one of the things that is kind of painful about doing it this way is you have to assign the key. You're like, oh, this is going to be painful. I got to do this 28 times, with all this data that I have. But with JSON, you can kind of jump to that. So let's just give it an empty argument because we're going to give it something. And let me grab some data here that I was using in another project. Okay, so we have data. And this is our header, essentially. Because let's come up here to let's pause on this and then get some data from our market data. So let's create a variable and call that market data. And that market data is going to equal to spreadsheet app. We want to get active spreadsheet. And we want to get sheet by name. And that name is going to be, let's go over here and look at it. That name is going to be salary market data. So now up to this time, anytime we've gotten data, we've always removed that header because we're like, well, we don't need that header. We know exactly which index we're going to access it from. Now we're going to keep that header. So let's create another one here and let's call this market sheet instead of data. There we go. Wow, that's horrible spelling. There we go. Let's call this market data now. And this market data is going to be equal to the market sheet. Now it's going to have equal rows, equal columns, all that. So we can simply just hit get range and then get values. And this will give us that two-dimensional array. So let's log this out. Let's save this and then log out this market data thing. Get market data, here we go. As you see, shouldn't be get, my apologies, it shouldn't be get range here, it should be get data range. So we're taking this market sheet, putting it in a variable market data, getting the data range, which is just getting every piece of data in there, and then getting the values. So now let's run it, and you'll see that we get a two-dimensional array. And our headers are included. And we can take those headers, and if you think about it, these headers are our keys. So we can assign this as a key area type, such and such, and so forth. So now let's jump down here or jump up here, and let's work on this. So this is that first row of headers. Just in our makeshift data here, we have Alice, age 30. She works in HR. Bob, 35, works in IT, and so on. So let's create a variable to extract that first row as keys. So let's say we'll make this a constant because eventually these here will be constants. Constant keys is going to equal, what's our variable? Data. And since this is a two-dimensional array, this is going to be 0. So all of our keys, we are saying, are these right here. And then we want to map the rest of it. So we'll say map rest of rows to objects. And this is how we're going to build it. Let's create another constant. Let's say JSON array, because that's what we really want to return. And we're going to take this data and we are going to do what's called slicing it. Now, what slice does, slice is a way we kind of break up arrays. And I'm not going to get too much into this, but we're going to start at 1. So we would put 1 in here. If you have a question on this, please, we can go back and watch the other videos that I have on arrays, or just send me a email or something and we'll answer it for you. And after we get done slicing it, we are going to map it. And we're going to map every row. I know we use row a lot. Remember, this can be anything. It's just trying to keep it simple and straightforward. That's what we're doing. We are mapping every row. And our rows, what we're going to do is let's create a variable, because we're going to need to fill the object just like we did up here. And this time we're going to go row by row, and we are going to run our for each, except this time we need to give it 2 pieces. We need to give it the value and the index. So that value is going to be a string and the index is going to be a number, but we don't need the array. We're giving it the array. So that's the 2 pieces, the 2 arguments that it's going to need. And then what we're going to do is on this, run a function on every row. And we are going to construct the object, which is this, just like we were doing up here, except this time we're going to take the keys, there it is, at the index. So the key matches the index. And you'll see what this does here in just a second. And that is going to be equal to our value. And what this is doing is this is assigning the key and value pairs. And then what we want to do is simply return the object. Now, remember, this return exists in this for each. So then it is returning that object. And remember, it is still mapping. And then let's just log out our variable. And that variable that we're trying to log out is right here. So now let's save this and then run this convert array to JSON. Then after this, you'll have multiple ways of everything it is that you need. And as you see, there it is. So we essentially mapped using our headers. ID is 1. Our name is Alice. Our age is 30 and our department is HR. The same thing for Bob. Bob is IT, department IT. So now we can essentially access this the same exact way that we accessed this, which is our object notation. So let's think of how that actually looks. So when you look at examples of the JSON format, it doesn't actually look like this. So to get it to look kind of more like JSON, we could put in something like this. And this is called, it's called Pretty Print. It's actually the name of it. Don't judge me. But what it is you're essentially JSON stringifying it. So let's call this JSON.stringify. And what we're going to stringify is the value is JSON array. And let's just say replacer null. And let's give it a 2. That should work. And I'm going to go ahead and put a comment in here for y'all. It's pretty print JSON. Okay, so now let's run this again. And you'll see that we have our one line here. But when you pretty print it, you'll see that it looks more like the data that you'll see if you are, kind of looking at things. And it's easier to read. ID number 1, name, age, department. And what we can do in the future when we start building out our compensation and market salary, we could either do it the same way we're doing it, but more than likely, we will convert it to JSON so we can just access it this way. And if you think about how we were doing data pulls and our retrieve in our compensation dashboard, as well as our CRUD, that records management thing, the create, retrieve, update, and we archived. When we pulled data, we were pulling data and then had a series of indexes that we were trying to map and pull, and then we created a map for it. But if we were to take all of our data and put it into a JSON, it could be a little bit more useful. And that's probably what we're going to end up doing with our salary market data, just because we have so much. Of course, our keys will be different, but the idea will be the same. So I hope this answered your question on how we could essentially use a function to transfer a two-dimensional array into either an object or even a JSON now at this point. If you do have further questions, or anybody has further questions, please send us an email and we'll try and get it answered. Or if you have an idea on another episode that you would like us to put together, please drop us an email as well and we'll see what we can do. And if these are helpful for you, please hit that subscribe button. And until next time, please take care.